I am so pleased to welcome our keynote presentation speakers from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST. We have two keynote presenters today, which I think is in the theme of building partnerships, so I think this is fantastic. We have Dr. Maria Dillard, who's a research social scientist at NIST in the Community Resilience Group. She's led and contributed to a number of efforts related to Hurricane Maria. We also have Dr. Judith Mitrani-Reiser, who's a senior research scientist at NIST, the director of the Disasters Failure Studies Program, and the associate chief of Materials and Structural Systems Division. So with that, I'd like to welcome Judy and Maria to provide our keynote presentation.
Got to lower that. Thank you so much, Jennifer, and it's really fantastic to see all of you. This is like one of my favorite spaces in the world. Just an opportunity to engage with my most favorite people from our profession, so it's really a pleasure, and I really thank NIRI for putting this on again, and for University of Maryland for hosting us. So good morning, NIRI community and friends of the NIRI community. It's really, really great to be back at the summit after 2 years and to see so many familiar faces and hopefully make some new connections later on today. I'll be around all day today, so will Maria, and I really hope that you'll have an opportunity to come meet us if you haven't and ask us anything you like about NIST and working there. It's really an honor to help kick off this fantastic meeting by sharing some of the disaster research and investigations conducted at NIST, or the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which you heard a little bit about earlier today. Maria and I will be focusing our remarks this morning on how we, as a community, can help strengthen community resilience and how partnerships in our professional work translate into impactful changes to policy and practice. So you heard Susan say earlier today that NIRI is a jewel, and all of its centers are jewels, and that you are an asset to this country, and I couldn't agree more with that. I really want to re-emphasize that. All right, as you can see from our mission statement here, NIST is a wide-ranging U.S. science and engineering agency with the ultimate goal of improving quality of life through science, standards, and technology. While many of you may recognize NIST because you might see some of the funding opportunities, like the one that Susan mentioned earlier, our Disaster Resilience Research Grants Awards or Centers of Excellence, I also want to share that it's an agency with a very long history. It was founded in 1901, and it's part of the Department of Commerce. We have two beautiful and amazing research campuses. One of them is only 40 minutes from here in Gaithersburg, Maryland, so I highly encourage you to come visit us sometime. I also added the agency's core values at the bottom of this slide because they really mean a great deal to me. When I first came to NIST, the then NIST director of our laboratory programs, we have two directors, and he introduced a new cohort of leaders at NIST, and he handed me this tiny piece of paper with NIST core values printed on it. And I thought it was really strange at the time. This, our associate director for laboratory programs is handing each one of us this little paper that he printed himself for us. But they had on them these 4 core values, and I want to emphasize them. It's perseverance, integrity, inclusivity, and excellence. We really, at NIST, take the long view, planning the future with scientific knowledge and imagination to ensure continued impact, and we're going to hear that over and over and over again at the summit, and relevance for our stakeholders. We are ethical, honest, independent, and provide an objective perspective, and I can't say how important that is. It's extremely, if you want your work to have impact and to be adopted by communities, you need to have integrity. We work collaboratively to harness the diversity of people and ideas both inside and outside of NIST and to attain the best solutions to multidisciplinary challenges. And we apply rigor and critical thinking to achieve world-class results and continuous improvement in everything we do. Now, this might seem silly, and I'm sure all of your universities have like core values and a mission statement, and you guys kind of hear the dean say it every once in a while, but these 4 core values mean a tremendous deal to me. I still have the same little paper. Now it's like all crinkly and wrinkled and maybe a few dinner stains. It's up on my wall. And I look at it all the time because as a public servant, I'm constantly thinking how we can better serve Americans and our neighbors around the world in the work that we do. Oh, does this work? Okay, that's so much easier, thank you. All right, so this slide provides a snapshot of the incredible disaster studies that are conducted at NIST, spanning the micro scale, which we apply to material science, all the way to the macro and community scale, which we apply to buildings and infrastructures and communities. The Materials and Structural Systems Division, which is where I live at NIST, houses 4 research programs. And so that's research done inside of NIST. I know a lot of you know NIST from some of the funding opportunities, but we do a lot of research in-house, and it's really fantastic. So we have the Infrastructure Materials Group, we have a Structures Group, an Earthquake Engineering Group, and a Community Resilience Group. The division also houses some programs that are actually quite unique, and the director of Disaster and Failure Studies is here today, which manages all field studies and investigations that are conducted at NIST, some of those under our National Construction Safety Team Act, which I'm gonna talk a lot about later today. We also house and are the lead agency for 2 of the programs that Susan mentioned earlier today, the National Earthquake Hazard Program and the National Windstorm Impact Reduction Program. Both of those have had tremendous impact in our history in reducing impacts to these disasters. Our division and lab also engage with many extramural programs, including the Disaster Resilience Research Grants Program, which you heard is a collaboration with NSF. We also have a professional research experience program, which is kind of an internship and a collaboration with a lot of universities. And if you haven't heard of PREP, I highly encourage you to take a look at that program. It's another way to collaborate with NIST researchers and scientists. Another notable program that was funded by NIST is our Center of Excellence on Community Resilience, which is headquartered at Colorado State University and is sadly coming to an end, at least in its first phase, with NIST funding very soon. It's been an honor working with all of you. So I am really so happy and pleased to see so many of our awardees and colleagues from so many of these programs here today. All right, so NIST has a very long history of studying disasters and building failures. We conduct these studies under various authorities. I've already mentioned a couple of them: NCSD, the National Construction Safety Team, NEHRP, and NWERP, which I also briefly mentioned. But NIST also has a very long history before any of these programs existed in studying disasters and failures under our Organic Act, so the law that created NIST. So as you can see, our studies span multiple hazard types and more than 5 decades. It's a very long time of growing expertise within NIST on studying disasters, all with the goal, right, of having impact. We study these events because we want to see changes to code, standards, and practice, and we want that impact. All the events in bold and with an asterisk are currently ongoing events, and all of those that have a circle next to them are current federal investigations. We score dozens of events per year, and some years ago, we partner with sorry, let me advance the slide one moment. Sorry about that. All right. So given this long history of studying disasters at NIST, something that's been core to all of these studies and investigations is that they have a very strong scientific component. They have very strong partnerships, and again, you're going to hear that over and over and over again at the summit. And they have the goal of having impacts, really impactful impacts to policy and to practice. So given the nature of the national disasters programs that are housed at NIST, we have always engaged extensively with other parts of NIST. So for the remaining part of our talk, Marie and I are going to talk a lot about how these three core themes exist in two of our federal investigations and how you see them trickle into a lot of our studies that are happening outside of our investigations as well. All right, so in the previous slide, I showed you the many events, or 2 slides ago, that we have studied or are actively studying at NIST under various authorities. However, there are so many events that we are not studying or that we have not studied. And so how do we decide where to go, where to deploy to, what to study? Those are all very important questions, and all questions that I'm sure many of you ask yourselves before you go out to any event. We want to ensure that we're doing so because there's good reason and that we're doing so ethically. It's so very important. So we developed a scoring rubric at NIST many years ago, and it was actually at the request of one of our federal advisory committees to assess each event that has national and international significance. We quantitatively score the intensity of the hazard, its impacts on the built environment, and its impacts on humans and society. We also assess an event using qualitative measures that include primary authorities. So, does NIST have the primary authority to be here, or is it NTSB, or is it the FBI, which in some cases it is? Do we have the financial and personnel resources to conduct such a study, and whether there are unique features, and this is really critical and I hope very central to all the work that you do, whether there are unique features to study that we believe and that we know could lead to impactful changes to standards and practice. We update the score with new information that we gather ourselves in the field, and we use this tool to make recommendations to our director of NIST on whether we should conduct a federal investigation or continue with a study. We score dozens of events per year, and some years ago, we partnered with SciServer at Johns Hopkins University. These are a bunch of astrophysicists and computer scientists who have done a fantastic job of creating very large databases that are collaborative for scientists. And they've been working with us for about 4 years to help us automate part of the scoring system and help us make ourselves and NIST more agile in our response to events and collaborating with other partnering agencies and with academics as well. All right, so now you know a little bit about NIST, you know a little bit about the division that Marie and I live in, and you know a lot, I hope now, about the kinds of programs and the authorities that we use to conduct these programs. So now I'm going to transition to something that is, very somber and a little bit hard for me to talk about because it impacts me directly, but it's probably definitely the most important work I've done in my life. So on June 24, 2021, most of us woke up to the horrifying news that a building had partially collapsed in the middle of the night in Florida without any apparent cause. Within 48 hours of the Champlain Tower South collapse, NIST had staff on the ground in Surfside to collect technical information about the failure. And we sent this preliminary reconnaissance team to meet with stakeholders, to explain our authorities, and ultimately to collect enough information to decide and update that scoring sheet, which I just mentioned, and decide whether we do a full-blown federal investigation of this horrible event. The deployed team was tasked with collecting information of the failure, introducing NIST to so many authorities and the incident command, and we continue to provide regular investigative updates at the Unified Command meetings. A very large virtual team also existed at NIST that stayed behind, and they supported all kinds of activities for the deployed team. The duality of teams and this partnership, allow for our field teams to get as much done as possible in a very short period of time. So just 6 days after the building collapsed, and I do think this might be the quickest from from failure to launching of a federal investigation for NIST. So on June 30th, the then acting director of NIST announced at a local press conference that NIST was launching a federal investigation into the cause of the collapse. All right, so this is where now lots and lots and lots of partnerships started emerging and thriving. It was absolutely incredible, the generosity that we saw from so many of our colleagues here today. The collapse site was changing quickly every single day as rescue efforts continue. It was necessary that we document all the layers of the collapsed building, as well as any pre-identified pieces of evidence that NIST scientists and engineers were identifying from safe distances. NIST staff members coordinated and we led remote sensing efforts to determine where pieces of evidence were located on the debris pile. We were supported by experts from FEMA, Florida State University, Miami-Dade Fire Department, the NERI Rapid Center at UW and OSU, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. Geological Survey, and the Virginia Beach Fire Department. We took daily high and low resolution LiDAR scans of the site from balconies on adjacent buildings to record the locations of building specimens after collapse and to track them throughout all of their movements afterwards. Drones and time-lapse cameras were also recording the rapidly changing scene, and this data provides our investigation still today a very rich data set to work with moving forward as we documented all of our team's activities. The drone flights were extremely well coordinated by the incident so that there was coverage 24 hours a day, but also so that there was only one drone flying at a time. Whenever possible, pilots on the site flew drones over the collapsed pile to geolocate evidence, and that became incredibly important for us as well. After the site was cleared, NIST began their subsurface investigation at the site, which included standardized procedures for monitoring the groundwater, as well as field and laboratory testing of the soil and rock. Field testing sheds light on how the subsurface soil layers vary in depth below the building and across the building's footprint. This testing included performing standardized penetration testing to reveal the stiffness of different layers of the soil. Boreholes were also made on site and near the site to collect soil samples that are used to determine the general characteristics and type of soil deposits, the general soil classification, the size of the grains within the soil mass, and soil strength characteristics. Rock core samples were also collected from these boreholes to assess rock quality and structure. We could not have conducted this work without the incredible support of Georgia Tech. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and Olson Engineering was also there to assist us, but all of these partners have contributed to numerous phases of the investigation, and we could not have done it, and I'll repeat that many times, without this phenomenal partnership. NIST received new information in 2022 after the civil litigation settled. There were hundreds of lawsuits after this building collapsed, as you can imagine, and then they were all organized in one very large litigation, and that all ended in 2022. But with the closing of that litigation came out a lot of really new and valuable information for our team. So it prompted us to pursue additional data at the collapse site, which we had to do with all kinds of permissions because everything had already been cleared by then. So we deployed a small team, including experts from NIST and from Georgia Tech again, to document and create high-resolution 3D images of the sections of foundation piles that were extracted from the site by all the parties of the civil litigation. We also leveraged the fantastic equipment and personnel from NERI at UT Austin, which was fantastic. We also had researchers from Utah State University who contributed their expertise, their custom-built vibration centers, and specialized truck design to shake the ground at specific frequencies. And you can see NERI's thumper in two of the pictures on this slide as well. So as you can see, there's like this, NERI pearl necklace being built, right? At every phase of the investigation, we're using different resources and different centers and different personnel. It's just been fantastic. So we have partnered with the Laboratory for Social Science Research at Florida International University and with Florida Atlantic University, two of our local partners. And it's very important that, and you'll hear a lot about this from Maria, that we establish local partnerships in all of our work. So we've established this partnership to collect evidence from the memories of individuals with knowledge of the building and its history. Some of this interview-based evidence confirms information that's been previously reported in the media, and some of it verifies what we observe in our own investigations and our team. And some of it we're finding out for the first time when we're meeting these individuals. A lot of individuals have not spoken to anyone and only want to speak to NIST. And so it's been really eye-opening to hear their experiences. We have collected and analyzed social science evidence that has not been publicly reported in the media and captured videos that also have not been reported in the media previously. We are learning from all of these interviews how to verify physical and archival evidence that we've already collected, and how to be strategic in what additional evidence our team should seek. And these includes audiovisual files, expert field notes, further interviews, and records of many kinds. So to date, our social science evidence collection efforts have mainly focused on interviews with survivors, with residents, with families, with staff, with eyewitnesses of the collapse, and others who have firsthand knowledge of the building. We've completed 33 interviews. Some of them were interviewed more than once. And we plan to conduct the remaining interviews in the following 4 months. And something that's been critical to share is that each one of these teams, interview teams, includes at least one social scientist and at least one engineer because of the content and the nature of the interviews. As part of our interviews, we ask our key informants to mark their past observations on maps or on pictures. And you can see 2 of the photos here demonstrate how we visualize these observations. So in the lower right-hand photo, this is actually someone has drawn what they saw that night during the collapse, from their very unique point of view and where their apartment was. In another case, on the upper right-hand side, you can see how we take a transcript of an interview and then visualize it so that our teams understand, visually, what are these individuals telling us and how can we connect all of that back together? NIST awarded a contract last year to the Applied Research Associates and also a task order to the Army Corps of Engineers to help provide us with local engineering support. Again, local partnerships help so much, and they are a tremendous way to not just lessen the burden of our staff, but really to build the capacity of our staff to understand local practices. And so having these partnerships is really fantastic. We created this partnership to really complete all of our invasive testing program. So to extract subsamples from our physical evidence and then subsequently test them at different national laboratories. So we've been using the Army Corps of Engineers laboratory facilities and the Bureau of Reclamation laboratory facilities. Development and analyses of failure hypotheses are a major focus of our activities in the investigation. The failure hypotheses include both failure initiation and failure progression. We classify each of these hypotheses as either probable, plausible, unlikely, or disproven. And through analyses and experimentation, we aim to reduce the number of probable or possible hypotheses to a very small number, or hopefully just one, as we converge on a final understanding of the how and the why this building collapsed. We are leveraging the fantastic expertise of full-scale structural testing at the University of Washington and at the University of Minnesota, with an emphasis on slab column connections in the pool deck that are representative of connections and columns at the and that are representative also samples of the southern face of the tower. So trying to capture and verify a lot of things that we're hearing from eyewitnesses, that we're seeing in videos, and that are showing up in our analyses. We have developed computational structural models to examine all of our team's collapse hypotheses and to help us determine the technical conditions that may have led to the collapse. Due to the complex nature of this failure and this investigation, there is no single structural model that would be capable of addressing all initiation and progression collapse mechanisms. Rather, we developed a series of models that capture a variety of failure mechanisms and are using not just the design of the structure, but what we are learning from our interviews, what we're learning from the evidence, to update those models with as built and add as existing at the time of collapse conditions. Since NIST staff were never physically on the collapse debris, it was very important to articulate the need for us to identify pieces of evidence from that site. So NIST had our first federal investigation under the NCST authorities was the World Trade Center. And in that investigation, we nearly lost the ability to have any physical evidence from that failure. Learning that lesson from many years ago, the most important thing that I articulated to every person on that site is that we cannot let this evidence leave the site without documentation and without trying to save as many pieces as possible so that we can use them in our investigation. That required a lot of partnership. It meant that we, NIST, helped contribute to the incident action plan of the incident command, that we developed new processes for how to identify and how to tag evidence, and then we had to train everyone on site, first responders, during both of their shifts, morning and night, to make sure that they understood everyone's role and that evidence would not leave that site. All right, and now I'm going to end my part of the talk and move on to Maria's part of the talk, but I want to again emphasize partnerships. So I have described the multitude of partnerships that we have developed over the last 3 years with individuals, with agencies, with local authorities outside of NIST. But given the large size of this team that I just mentioned and of all of our investigative teams, and the many disciplines that they represent, it's imperative that I speak to you about the partnerships we develop within our teams so that we can achieve a common goal. And so it gives me great honor to emphasize NIRI's framework for convergence research, which provided our team and me the tools to help formalize how we organize and manage a very large disciplinary and diverse team. Rather than picking a singular scientific orientation or collaborative preference, it became very clear to us that we needed to use all of it. There wasn't one solution for us. And so I leave you here with some definitions for unidisciplinary orientation, multidisciplinary orientation, interdisciplinary orientation, and transdisciplinary orientation. And then I will just briefly walk you through. I didn't do that. But it's lovely if you want to keep it that way. We'll have some nice music playing in the background. After we launched our investigation, our most important charge was to develop a team and to identify the most important technical projects that this team needed to represent. And so this is a great example, just the organization of our investigation. It's a great example of unidisciplinary work. Another example, now I'm going to move on through each of these. Multidisciplinary work is when we're each working within our disciplines, but then have to collaborate because we eventually are going to have a common goal and want to merge all of it together. And so how we do that and do that effectively so that we're not doing that at the end of an investigation or at the end of a study or end of a project is really critical. And so we've developed ways where we meet on a very regular basis so that each of our individual projects are informing the other projects of what they're doing. Sometimes there's a very unique problem, and we need multiple disciplines to solve the problem, so we create these tiger teams to solve that problem. And this, I'm showing 3 examples. Soil structure interaction is one of them, but there are, our invasive testing program was another one of those, and it's come up more than once in our investigation. And finally, this transdisciplinary work is really critical, and that's when we create just an entirely new conceptual framework on how we engage with one another. And how we assess our failure hypotheses in our investigation is a tremendous example of that. And so I'm going to leave you with a slide on the many collaborations that we have, coordination activities that we have, and cooperation that we built with not just local and stakeholders within NIST, outside of NIST, and other federal agencies, and with so many of you in the room. I cannot tell you how grateful I am for your brilliance. And now I'll turn it over to Maria.
So shifting to our second active investigation, this is a rare thing for NIST to have two active investigations at the same time. And I'm really excited to tell you a little bit about this one. Within the Hurricane Maria program, NIST is studying the hurricane's effects on Puerto Rico along with the subsequent recovery. And the ultimate goal of this work, like all of our other work, is really to develop recommendations for improvements to building codes, standards, and practices very generally, that will help communities in Puerto Rico, but also across the U.S. that are facing windstorm hazards. This is our largest geographic scope and our first hurricane that we've ever had as a federal investigation, so that's really important to the approach that we took to this work. We're authorizing this under two different authorities. So I think you've heard about both of them today, the National Construction Safety Team Act, as well as the National Windstorm Impact Reduction Program, which I am grateful to our NSF colleagues for highlighting. These two authorities are really allowing us to expand the scope of this to really encompass both the impact of the event as well as the subsequent recovery. For Hurricane Maria, the key decisions that affected our choice to launch this event included the severity of this hazard. It hit as a strong Category 4 hurricane and affected the entire population. The severity of the impacts on engineered buildings, many of which sustained quite a loss of function as a result of extensive non-structural damage and intrusion of rainwater. And finally, challenges with emergency communications and response, which included a complete loss of communications for extended period of time. In addition, there were impacts to infrastructure systems, education, healthcare, businesses that also went on for quite some time, and many of which are still going on today. And all of these factors contributed to our decision to launch an investigation and a research study to look at this event. The NIST director established the National Construction Safety Team for Hurricane Maria in February of 2018. So Hurricane Maria hit at just the end of 2017 with three goals for the investigation. And these were to characterize the wind environment and the technical conditions associated with deaths and injuries, the performance of representative critical buildings and the designated safe areas within those buildings, including dependence on lifelines, to look at the performance of emergency communication systems and the public's response to those communications. And to achieve those goals, we established these 4 projects as part of the investigation: our hazard characterization project, performance of critical buildings, public response to emergency communication, and our morbidity and mortality project. We also developed an additional set of projects to complement the investigation. And these we put under our National Windstorm Impact Reduction Program, or NWIRP. And those 3 projects are focused on different aspects of recovery of business and supply chains, recovery of critical social functions, primarily those of education and healthcare, and impacts to and recovery of infrastructure systems. The integration of data and findings for these 7 technical projects is absolutely central to the completion of our investigation, because all of this data can feed that investigation. And to provide a sense of the complexity of this integration, I'm going to focus on a select example from our broader investigation that will look at one type of critical building and the assessment of hazard exposure, building performance, functionality, including infrastructure dependency and recovery. So many of you are very familiar with this facility, and Jennifer did not know I was going to present this, but our University of Florida colleagues have been an incredibly vital partner to this work, looking at the hazard exposure of our critical buildings. So hospitals were selected as a point of focus for our NCST investigation of Hurricane Maria for several projects because of the critical role they play in emergency response and subsequent recovery. But also, the hospitals in particular in Puerto Rico are designed according to building codes and standards that are used in the mainland US. So we had to think carefully about what we would study within this investigation that would translate to broader recommendations for building codes and standards elsewhere in the US. Hurricane Maria's impacts on hospitals included extensive damage to the buildings and the contents, and hospitals were also impacted greatly by loss of supporting infrastructure with disruption to the utility services of power and water, as well as road access, communications. Those damages greatly impacted their ability to function, and what we know is that previous studies have shown that this delayed access to medical treatment or interruption in the care being given may have contributed to the excess deaths that we have seen associated with Hurricane Maria. So one specific example where we're linking the hazard information across the projects is to look at wind loads on two particular hospital buildings. And for these analyses, estimated time histories of wind speed and direction from the wind field model are being combined with wind tunnel test data to describe the time histories of wind loads on the hospitals. And this includes, for the wind tunnel in particular, it includes point pressures at over 500 tap locations, area average pressures on elements of the cladding, and overall loads on rooftop equipment and the building as a whole, all of which will tell us a great deal about the performance of these buildings under the specific hazard conditions. Hospital Bella Vista is one of two hospitals investigated in our performance of critical buildings projects, and was one of the two hospitals that we used in the wind tunnel to look at how the wind approach may have impacted the building's performance. Our team has been very fortunate to work with our colleagues at the University of Florida in the Boundary Layer Wind Tunnel on this work. The assessment of hospital functionality and infrastructure dependency during and following Hurricane Maria is being supported by data and analyses from many different projects that examine the performance of critical buildings, emergency communications, morbidity and mortality, infrastructure systems, social functions, and businesses. The mixed methods that we're using to characterize hospital building performance and functionality for hospitals and healthcare access really include a lot of different approaches drawing from many different disciplines. And I'm pleased to say we have quite a strong social science set of methodologies being employed here, in addition to our engineering methodologies, as well as various modeling techniques, network analysis methods, all coming together to try to answer the question about how hospital buildings performed and what that functionality looked like and where we lost functionality for people to actually access the healthcare they needed. This graphic captures some of the common themes that we've seen across projects. And first, in the observed damage sequence, we see that wind and wind-borne debris cause damage to the building envelopes. The building envelope is that outer enclosure of the building that keeps out the wind and rain, ideally, and includes the roof, walls, windows, and doors. Then damage to that envelope allowed for the intrusion of rainwater inside the building, and that water intrusion then damaged equipment and contents and forced relocation of patients and staff. The sequence of damage and impacts is represented in the following summary of observations that we have collected from hospital personnel interviews under our morbidity and mortality project. And I will say that these descriptions are quite representative of descriptions we've received from a number of other interviews. The hospital personnel across most sampled facilities reported significant physical and structural damage to the facilities, particularly windows and door damage, roof sheathing failures, and significant parts of the roofs being blown off. In most buildings, this damage allowed substantial rainwater leakage and winds to impact patient rooms and flooding and destruction in various parts of the hospital, such as intensive care units and emergency departments. This forced emergency transfer of patients, some in critical conditions, to the hallways and other floors. And obviously, those conditions would impact patient care and may have played quite a role in mortality. To achieve this work and the integration of data and analyses that I've just described, and those are small examples from our overall investigation, we are very fortunate to have a team that represents a real diversity of knowledge and training come together to do this work. And as a theme of this meeting is partnerships, I think I want to really acknowledge, as the associate lead of this team, that achieving any kind of multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, let alone transdisciplinary work really does require that you first have a real partnership within your team. And that partnership doesn't exist by itself and kind of without sustained encouragement and support and development. And that's been a really critical thing for our team, as we have had to really persevere quite some time in doing this work. This work takes a long time. It has a lot of pressures to it, and there have been quite a few challenges of doing this data collection during a variety of circumstances and with other compounding events affecting the location where we're studying this event. In addition to our team, we have a number of partnerships that have been very critical to doing this work. I want to emphasize in particular our partners in Puerto Rico, within the formal agencies of government, but also within informal entities as well. We have a number of colleagues on the ground who've been quite supportive of our work and have helped make this possible. We have amazing people who have participated in our data collection, hospital administrators, school administrators, facilities managers, household residents, I could go on, who have contributed a great deal of time to providing their stories and their information to us. Within NIST, we have amazing partners across the laboratory and outside across our other NIST units. And in addition to this, to provide the specialized expertise, but also kind of in-context knowledge that we need for both our NCST and NWERP projects, which has ranged from wind tunnel testing to public health, the team has 5 major contracts with carefully selected outside experts that have, among them, Spanish language fluency and a local presence in Puerto Rico, and that's been critical to carrying out this work, particularly during the pandemic years. I'm going to quickly highlight, oh, that's not coming up. Oh, boy. A lot of animation there. I want to quickly highlight one of our joint field studies. So we have many centers of excellence, many facilities across NIST that are located on this map, but 3 centers of excellence, and one of those is our Community Resilience Center of Excellence based at Colorado State University, but including many institutions in addition. And I'm going to talk about that. One of our collaborative field studies. So the collaborative field studies were designed to support our disaster and failure studies program through data collection, field methods, and findings, in hopes that we would collect data that would further help us to identify the technical factors that are responsible for building performance and failures in the aftermath of disaster, but also to test new field methods, new sampling protocols, come up with new ways to do this work in the field collectively. And ultimately, in this particular case, we really wanted to be able to come out of this study recommending a frequency of data collection, because we knew going in this was going to be a longitudinal study for Lumberton, North Carolina. We started this field study following Hurricane Matthew. You can see the timeline. It's quite complicated. We didn't know there would be all these additional events that we would be tracking as we went through this work. With set research objectives per wave, the field study has focused on initial impacts and then the subsequent recovery for housing, business, schools, infrastructure systems, and a number of aspects. But we've been able to really document over time some of the planning and action that has taken place as we've been studying this community and going back over time. So it really starts to show you the timeline, and while there are many things that haven't recovered, there are quite a number of changes that are positive that we can really document and see and look forward to how those may impact and how they have impacted the outcomes of the subsequent events. The field study team is truly a study in partnerships across disciplines, methods, terms and definitions, ways of handling data, with anywhere from 24 to 9 field team members per wave, the lowest being during the pandemic, and 6 to 9 institutions represented on this team per wave. The ability to formulate effective partnerships and strong team dynamics has been crucial, and the study has really been a great ground for multidisciplinary collaboration, partnerships between federal and academic institutions, and has been an incredibly important training ground for many of our students, postdocs, and early career researchers. We've traded off in leadership each year with each wave of this study. We've shared in that role, but also given that opportunity as a new space for our team members to advance. And it's been a really incredible 6 waves, and we are working to wrap up our analyses now. So in honor of our audience and the incredible partnerships we've experienced in our disaster and failure studies investigations, we wanted to highlight all the Near East centers that we have worked with on the 2 investigations and the Lumberton field study, and we expect many more of these to come in the future. Now I'm going to briefly transition to talk about the importance of all of this work. So I know I don't speak just for myself and for Judy, but to all the researchers in the room when I say we don't do this work because we want to understand what's happened in the past. It's a piece of it, but certainly it's because we really want to change what happens in the future with these events. And there are a variety of ways this change happens, but all of them require us translating our science into something different, into something that's actionable. And that process takes different expertise. So all of us as engineers and scientists are not necessarily always the ones that do this piece of transitioning. It can require quite a long time horizon and is challenging, but it's the most important part of the work that we do. And I'm going to present just a few examples of this translation, of starting with science into guidance. And this is the NIST Community Resilience Planning Guidance for Buildings and Infrastructure. This was developed with public and private experts and takes a holistic look at providing communities the ability to make more effective decisions in relation to how they improve their built environment. And it's really provides a way for them to turn resilience concepts into action and gives a basis for future planning and prioritization of the actions. And it has a number of tools that kind of support this guidance. In addition, we have some performance objective guidance that comes from our earthquake hazards work. So NIST and partners published the immediate occupancy performance objective in 2018, where they really wanted to think beyond just the focus on the building to look at social, economic, and community considerations related to building performance. That was then followed by the functional recovery performance objective in 2021, again, pushing the bounds on what we think about in how we design and what codes we want for our buildings. What do we want those buildings to be able to do following a hazard event? How do we want those to perform, and kind of setting the beginnings of new standards for that work. From our Lumberton field study, we've created a number of products, and others are still in development, that guide other researchers to conduct similar longitudinal studies in other communities that provide basis for how to measure particular aspects of impact and recovery, and that will really give a sense of how to create teams and manage teams that are this complex. So we have a number of products that have gone into design safe, many more that will go into design safe, and manuscripts in preparation on our field study processes and metrology guidance. Another example is translating science to standards and codes. This is perhaps what NIST is most known for, and I just want to say here very clearly, this work cannot be done without partnerships. NIST cannot on its own implement any of these things. We rely on our partnerships to do this. The ASTM standard here is based on NIST Community Resilience Planning Guidance Methodology and builds on prior NIST efforts. It was approved in 2022 and provides others with a framework for how they might engage in resilience planning. For the first time, the 2024 version of the International Building Code includes a section on tornado resiliency. This is a reference document that's widely used to create local building code laws, and the 2022 edition of ASCE 7 also includes a chapter on tornado load requirements. In fact, our colleagues from NIST, Mark Levitan and Long Fan, were just nominated for a Samuel J. Heyman Service to America Award, or what's known in public service as a SAMI Award. They call it the Oscars of the federal government, for this work that's taken more than a decade following the Joplin tornado NCST investigation to implement. And finally, we have translation of science into tools to support decision-making for those who face hazards and are responsible for supporting states, communities, organizations, and projects in resilience planning. These tools are being used by a number of different types of entities, including local and state governments, NGOs that work with communities, and federal agencies that fund communities. And I've represented tools that are developed by NIST or NIST-funded efforts, including NCORE, which I hope you'll hear about later in this meeting, our NIST Economic Decision Guide software, and our NIST Alternatives for Resilient Communities tool. Your science has and will continue to contribute to each of these outcomes, the guidance, codes and standards, and tools. And we look forward to ongoing partnerships with NIRI. And I hope to encourage some of you to consider a career in the federal workforce. We need many of you to be engaged as scientists and engineers within the federal government space. But those of you that are in an academic space, please consider your federal agency partners. We love to work with you, and I think you can see quite a few examples of how we've done it here. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy and Maria, for providing us some insight into these really important studies and the work you do at NIST, and in particular for how the partnerships are so important to the success of these studies. So thank you very much.